Hi, my name is Manu Gupta, and this is the second interview in a series called Life in 2030 and the Effects of AI on Our Society. I'm here today with Ken Mulvaney, serial entrepreneur and founder of BenevolentAI, a flagship company here in the United Kingdom.
Hi, Manu. Good to see you again.
Great. Hey, Ken, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself to kick this off? You have a quite an interesting background. I think everyone would love to hear about it. And tell us a little bit about Benevolent and how you started it.
Okay, no, I'm happy to do that. So you mentioned I'm an entrepreneur. This happens to be I think it's maybe my 13th startup company, so I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment. And all the way along the way, I had kind of common themes between technology and healthcare. And I think Benevolent was the first time that I've been able to merge the two effectively. The company Benevolent was established primarily from some of the shortcomings that I saw in my last company, which was a biotechnology company based here in the UK. It was a traditional biotechnology company. It was 10 years in the making before that company exited in 2012. As it turns out, it was the largest biotech exit in Europe in 10 years at the time.
Amazing.
Thanks, Manu. But nonetheless, it was 10 years to build this company. And one of the things that was glaringly evident in biotech, and it's the same in pharma, and probably generally speaking in healthcare, is this gigantic mismatch between the information that's available and kind of humanity's ability to process that information. And if you just look at the unstructured, so this is written information. So every day we update our technology system with 10,000 new PubMed publications. So these are publications that are just in my sector.
And these are all the PhDs and the doctors writing publications daily.
That's right, in very specific fields. So when I started this company, I wanted to focus on two very challenging areas in science in general. One is the ability to assimilate and know everything that's out there. Because in pharma, you have tremendous domain specialty, where a cardiologist is a cardiologist, but not an immunologist. A neuroscientist understands neuroscience in, it's kind of that mile deep, inch wide. They understand it very, very well, but it doesn't translate into other fields beyond kind of basic biological and maybe drug development principles. And I wanted to democratize that information so that all scientists could share, here's a snapshot of the current knowledge, and be able to delve into that in varying detail, so they could become domain experts without themselves being domain experts. So that was the first thing I wanted to do when tackling this challenge. The second one was around hypothesis generation. And there's a tremendous mismatch between the amount of information that's available and our ability to find cures for diseases. And as it turns out, there are 13,600 known diseases and 5,000 known treatments for those diseases. So there's 8,000 diseases that are completely untreated, which is obviously a big problem. What's even more shocking is the number of mechanisms that those treated diseases go on. So there's effectively 400 known mechanisms for treating diseases. So of your 20,000 genes that you have, we as an industry are targeting 400 of those. Now we have a lot of drugs that target those 400 targets, or rather, we have 400 mechanisms. But alas, there's 400 that we're looking at rather than closer to the 20,000. And the challenge is that is finding the link between a disease and the mechanism, the target. And what most pharma does is they build, they rely on academia, these 10,000 new publications every day, to say this target is implicated in this disease. That's the norm. And what AI can do is can assimilate all of that information and make that link for you. And what pharma is very good at doing is building a drug that hits that target.
Yeah.
But actually, they have to rely on academia to find that target to begin with. So it's an ACE inhibitor for hypertension or whatever it turns out to be. Academia found that. And in almost every instance, academia has found that. And what we live in now is an age where technology can go and build that first link. So then you can go and drug that link. So,
and I would imagine, I mean, the benefit of this is because you have knowledge and you actually ingest all the information across all the different disciplines within healthcare, you might be able to find a potential cure or treatment to a disease in one specific area by reading research in a completely different area.
Yes, that is absolutely true. When we look at the hypothesis that the system generates, so just to maybe take one step back and say a little bit about what we do at Benevolent. We're a bit of a hybrid where we look very much like a biotechnology company in one respect. We have a chief medical officer and chemists and toxicologists and regulatory affairs. But at the other end, we look very much like an AI company. And we are an AI. We're a technology company that has a biology subsidiary. We make drugs. We develop those drugs. We do the preclinical development. We do the clinical development. And ultimately, we'll be doing the marketing of those programs. As you say, there may be one particular article that helps inform, finds that kind of that hidden gem that's out there. But typically, our hypotheses are generated based on 200 to 400,000 different publications will generate and substantiate a hypothesis. So the notion of there being kind of that one, that needle in a haystack that's kind of brought it all together, in reality isn't the case. And it's important to have the redundancy of the information that's in there too, because there's a lot of challenges around the reproducibility of information. Whether a scientist who publishes a paper, I can't remember what the actual term, I think it's called, like p-value spiking or something like that, where they just produce the best data. And most data is very difficult to reproduce when it's in there. But when you're taking it from so many different sources, it homogenizes the things. It's well supported or it's not well supported. And where it's well supported, like 200,000 to 400,000 pieces of information support a hypothesis, you have far more confidence that it's accurate.
So therefore, your ability to crunch all of this information actually should give people more confidence in the potential outcomes of the chemicals that you produce, of the molecules that you produce, because they are reproducible, they are far better supported, and therefore the technology actually enables people to produce better outcomes for patients because of it.
Yeah, that's true. In an ideal world, you could just progress your molecule in that fashion based on data which is supported. But we live in an environment which is extremely highly regulated. Putting a chemical into a human body is probably the most highly regulated industry on Earth. And the nice thing about using artificial intelligence in this test case is that regulators make us prove our technology and our drugs over and over and over again. When you take a drug through its preclinical and clinical development, there's a lot of regulatory hurdles that you have to pass. And when you have an indication, we recently published on a drug for ALS, which is an incurable disease that nobody really knows the etiology of what's causing this disease. There's 3 different genotypes. It's sporadic. It's the disease that Stephen Hawking has. It has a terrible prognosis. I think it's maybe 2 to 5 years after diagnosis, and current therapy gives you an extra 6 months at best on there. Our AI came up with a potential cure for that disease, and then we have to test it. And it's required that we test. The FDA requires that we test it. But it's a great example of something that didn't exist before, that humanity in the entire history of our existence in working in science has never been able to figure out how this works. A piece of technology came up with this, it was then tested, and it's now in development to treat the disease.
That's unbelievable. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
to think
cool
that
stuff.
to think that technology came up with a treatment for ALS that we weren't able to for so
Yes.
long. So, but you hit a little bit on the regulatory side. I mean, as you can imagine, you're ingesting chemicals into your body, so it encompasses policymakers, doctors, lawyers, you know, if anything goes wrong, and of course, patient trust. You know, what do you think needs to be done to really advance this from all these different constituents?
Yeah, I think from an FDA or European regulator perspective, it's going to take a long time for them to change because again, it's everyone has an interest in making sure that everything works, and it's been developed over decades and decades and decades that if you test in this sort of way, then you're less likely to have something really adverse to happen. And I think it's going to take a long time for a technology to replace the type of testing that's going to need to be done. Now, that's not to say that things can't change along the way. And I, for one, would like to see a lot of shift away from the in vivo modeling that the pharmaceutical industry is required to go through. So this is, you know, animal testing type things. There's good reason to use in silico type of technology to model that in a way which will be better than animal modeling. But once you get to the human stage, I think that it's going to require more time to test that over and over and over again. And it may be 10 years, it may be 20 years, it may be 30 years before regulators say, okay, well, actually, the human system is modeled so well that we actually don't need to test that anymore. And that will happen because the human body is a machine and it has mechanisms that will be understood. I mean, there's a lot that we know and there's still a lot that we don't know. And that's kind of how we speak at Benevolent. You kind of have your known knowns and you have your, well, if I know all this, I should also know this, or your should be knowns. I sometimes think of it as a periodic table of yesteryear, you know, when there was big kind of chunks of your periodic table that were missing, but you knew characteristic of what those elements were. You knew kind of roughly where it sat in the periodic table of elements, so you knew whether it was a gas or a metal, you knew how many valence electrons it had, and so on and so forth. So you know a lot of things about that, and you can begin to predict, well, if you know this, you should also know these different things.
Does that mean that AI as a technology has been a step change operation for healthcare in general? Meaning, has it completely taken your ability to produce these type of outcomes with all of this data and crunch that information in significantly lower time frames? Or has it lived up to your expectations and how fast the tech is moving to help for better outcomes?
Yeah, I think that there's good industry information, and I have some personal anecdotal information as well. As you probably know, to develop a drug takes a long time. It costs a lot of money in order to do that. My last company was not bog standard, it was a very progressive biotechnology company, and it was truly one of the faster companies. And after 10 years, when I sold that company, we had a pipeline of assets, you know, with kind of a couple of phase 2 assets, a couple of phase 1 assets, and maybe 4 or 5 preclinical assets. It cost me a lot of money to get them to that stage, and it took me a lot of time, a decade, to get to that stage. And within Benevolent at the moment, we have 3-4 phase 2 programs, a couple of phase 1 programs, and about 20 programs that are in preclinical development. And that's all within, I mean, the company's been around for a long time, but its drug development division of this company's been around for about 18 months or so. So in 18 months, I've built the same pipeline that I built in my last company, which took me 10 years. So it is an awful lot faster. And I can case diseases that I never would have been able to case before. You know, I can look at some of the most complicated diseases that are out there, and those are the ones we gravitate towards. You know, something like ALS or any number of the ones that sit on our pipeline are just very, very complex diseases. And you need to hold in your consciousness so many different variables in order to do that. Our system currently holds, I think, something like 220 million variables simultaneously. I can barely hold 4 in my head.
Unbelievable.
If I'm lucky.
Unbelievable. And look, Benevolent has actually reaped the rewards of it as well. From my understanding, it's the largest private AI company in all of Europe.
Yep.
So Ken, I mean, given that you've had so much experience in and around healthcare over the last few decades, maybe you could help pontificate a little bit about where you see the future going as well. I mean, what might be the effects of AI, let's say, on the clinical side of healthcare? Actually interacting with patients. Do you see the AI technologies more as an assistive technologies in helping doctors make better decisions and clinicians working well with patients and doing things more efficiently? Or do you actually see a future where the technology becomes so good that the ultimate patient just interacts with the technology?
That's a really good question. So if I'm thinking of the future in this, and I look at the amount of information that exists out there today, and our ability to extrapolate on the should-be knowns as well as the things that are known. The way that biologists think of the human body, whether it's disease or just how anything works, looks like a schematic. And you'll see them in any of these scientific publications where you have these lines and some acronym and then some more lines and then an acronym. So it's very pathway driven. So you can imagine a world where all of these pathways and all the interactions with these pathways are understood, right? Such that it's a gigantic, or maybe not even gigantic, but it's a big manual,
yep,
like an electrical diagram of the human body. And it knows everything that it needs to know to understand whether it's pathology or anything that happens within the human body. It's kind of predetermined. It is a machine. And you have to understand that machine. And if you can understand that machine in its entirety, then the notion of diagnosis, the way that we think of it as a physician or clinician, will be less about diagnosing, less about treatment, because that will be prescribed. It will be more around kind of care and support.
Yeah. Very interesting. So what you're effectively saying is that AI can actually help us reduce potentially human error. It can actually help us ensure that patient outcomes are driven by this manual, that people get the right medicines at the right time,
yep,
and are treated exactly for their diseases based on all the information that we connectively gather.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously through more sensors and more data is being
yep,
produced constantly from individuals.
mm-hmm.
And ultimately the need for doctors is really around the relationship. It's around the trust.
Yes, it's the human piece of that. And you bring up a good point in terms of the extra data that's out there, in terms of whether it's sensory data or environmental data, because all of these will have an impact on your body in a pathway sort of way, whether it's the weather or it's how much you're exercising or how much you're sedentary. All of that makes a difference, but it makes a difference on a pathway basis. It has an input into the body, and as a result, it has an effect on the body.
Are there any other areas of applied innovations in the healthcare space you find really interesting? I mean, I recently read a report that said 80% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years alone. Even if that's directionally right, it's absolutely amazing to think about all of this data being used, you at BenevolentAI being able to analyze and crunch all of this. What are the other areas of applied AI that we should really be thinking through here?
I'm interested in some areas outside of that healthcare space, because healthcare or kind of science in general is the approach that they take. The scientific method is kind of pervasive across so many different industries, and I like the ability to learn how to do something in one area of science and then apply it to another area of science. So I think one of the areas that we're inspired by at the moment at Benevolent is looking at energy storage solutions, so battery type technology, where we can increase the energy density. So if I look at the automotive industry, they've done a lot to kind of get your car from 0 to 60 in half a second, or whatever it turns out to be. It doesn't need to be any more dense in a car. But if you want to take an aircraft off the ground and keep it aloft, it requires far more energy density than current technology has. And within the automobile industry, which has driven a lot of the innovation in energy storage technology, they're now looking at other areas. They're looking at recharge times and that sort of things. They're not looking at having something that gets you 0 to 60 in 0.25 seconds. But it's going to require a lot of innovation that happens in those industries. And much of what we've learned in healthcare and our ability to ingest all this information, connect all this information to itself, and then begin to extrapolate as to what should be known can be applied and is being applied within our group into other areas of science like energy.
Very interesting. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time today. Maybe I could end off with one last question. I mean, this is a really interesting discussion that we've had, and we'd like to continue having more discussions along this line, thinking about 2030 and the implications of AI. Who do you think we should be speaking to next?
Okay, let's see. So I know a really interesting generalist. His name is Barney Pell. He put the first AI into space, so he worked for NASA. And he's a serial entrepreneur. He's one of the founders of Singularity University. And he's versed in a lot of topics. So I think he might be somebody interesting to reach out to.
Well, fantastic. It was great to have you here, Ken.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.